imagine everyone else has had a couple of weeks off as well. So we are yeah, it's hot in Australia, and my computer is working overtime. It's doing pretty well. I've got two different colours in my cameras today. This one's brighter, and this one's a bit, I don't know, different. Oh no, I haven't set up my social media platform yet. Hey, look, if you want to talk to me, use the hashtag webtheatre. That's webtheatre with an R-E. Ah, bloody hell. Webtheatre with a R-E. What's an ad? There you go. Cat videos. But you can look at me first. There we go. So we've been talking about how theatre normally, conventionally, is bounded by time and place and space that all operate simultaneously in order to create a visceral effect on the audience and the actors. Yep, everyone's sharing the same place, behaving by certain codes of behaviour depending on where they are in that space, and in that matrix of structures and functions, the magic of theatre happens. Yeah. Okay, so that is how there we go. That is how things are normally run, and we work with that and we create within that space and that environment. Yep, that kind of works that way. But we've been talking about how that hierarchy and that order, even in its most conventional form, is problematic for people like Batkin to understand, because of that nature of all of those people together working collectively to create that moment in space and time. Yep. So it's hard to get out. It's hard to understand in terms of finding another way of thinking about how this theory works. I think of performance works in this socially mediated space of online. We have to use a different theory. We can't use the same model because it simply doesn't work. Now that's where I looked to this guy, Scott Lash, whose book I'll show you again, Critique of Information. Is that coming up the right way for you, or is that back to front? Probably back to front. It's called Critique of Information. Yep. Now he talks about a media theory, comes out of Bowden and Moloch. A new way of thinking about analysis in modern media, particularly online. And he talks about three specific words: content, code, and communication. Right? And he talks about, and he cites Bowden and Moloch by saying that in this environment, it's culture at a distance, yeah, which I think kind of replicates that discovery I made of that dislocation of time and space. On here, all of those features are still there, but they're dislocated. They're not all happening simultaneously, and which kind of lends itself to this idea of culture at a distance, because we are distant from each other. Yep. Yes. Now the big difference with that, right, is that it becomes a case of, because it's culture at a distance, rather than the social act of everyone coming together, the social act is now the communication between each other. Yeah. So that becomes the social act. Not being together so much, but the idea of communication is up high in that hierarchy of things that we need to consider, those things that are necessary for this space to exist. Which means it shifts from a logic of shifts from a logic of structures to a logic of flow. So rather than the logic of being in the theatre, sitting at your seat, watching the curtain come up, waiting for the house lights to come down, and all those structures, it's not a logic of structure. It becomes a logic of flow of information. It becomes a logic of flow of that communication that has an energy and ebbs and flows, and there are hot peaks and lower peaks. Lower peak? Can you have a lower peak? Yeah. Dips and troughs, high peaks and troughs of that communication ebb and flow. That is the significant, and it's ironic that I have a river right now. Which means that when there's this ebb and flow of communication, there becomes hot periods of activity. Quite intense things, and we often talk about the idea that there are things trending on Twitter, ideas or concepts trending on Twitter, which is a metric and a way of understanding that flow, that something is trending, that it has got a high flow volume of communication going on around that idea. And so that, can you see how that works now? This culture at a distance. Because it's not, for example, I'm following the bushfires at the moment, obviously, like every other Australian is probably, on Twitter and all the rest of it. It's a very hot, pardon the pun, but it's a very intense subject of communication at the moment. There are a lot of comments and threads and broadcasts and announcements and presses and all sorts of things going on. So it becomes that, even though it's not here in my house, thank God, it is this culture at a distance. I'm engaged in the culture of that conversation at the distance that I'm at. And that's a significant way. That's a really different way for theatre makers to have to think about things, because theatre makers always think about things or people in that location, those social structures, that the social act of being together, rather than the social act of communication. Because when we have a social act of being together, the audience aren't allowed to communicate. Hang on a minute. So yes, that is the big game. There's a big shift in the way that we have to think about things. So our narrative and our storytelling has to be within this means of communication, not within the means of the social act. Sit and tell the story. That's the thing I've been trying to get my head around. So thank you, Mr. Nash. Now, the other thing he goes on to say is that because of that sort of immediacy, that ebb and flow, those peaks and troughs, value is associated to the intensity of those troughs, which are immediate. So things trend and things are popular for a while and then they disappear and they flow away. Now he argues here that art therefore becomes not as reflexive. We don't spend time thinking and contemplating about the big shifts in thinking and ideas that are presented to us in those works. So the ideas of Beckett or Artaud or any of those people, those ideas sort of sit and resonate for long periods of times because they are part of that social act of going and watching those shows and being a part of that experience and having that inform the next experience and the next social act. And so that they have a long sort of gestation period of cultural reflexivity and influence. Moving forward. Whereas in this ebb and flow environment, there isn't that space for reflexivity. There isn't that deep contemplation because the zeitgeist, I guess, has moved on to the next peak and forgotten about the last one. Now, I dispute that a little bit because, especially if you're in an ongoing environment of being online, you develop a history and a memory of those memes. I remember that famous meme. Do you remember seeing that one? Or you see memes or stories come back up in your thread and go, that's old. And you might even post a meme about people who post old memes. So I kind of dispute the idea that there's not something deep, that there's no extended duration of impact of a cultural event in this peak and trough version. Sorry, just kidding. Getting all so this is characterised by that ephemeral nature of ebbs and flows and peaks and troughs and of trending things. It's not contemplative in the social act because it's not. Yeah, is this making sense to you? So, where am I at? Culture and industry based on representation, long form research. Okay, so the thing about that is that if culture as it's been practiced, if theatre making as it's been practiced is part of that long term reflexive social act contemplative experience, right? The process of creating also has this long term research type process that goes along with it. It takes time to put a show together, to research a play, the community and all the rest of it. It is a reflexive process by the definition of creating it. Now, I've found that you shouldn't really be avoiding that. To be able to create something, you have to be deeply reflexive and thinking about all the shit I'm talking about, for example. But the delivery of it, because the delivery of your creative interpretation is in an environment that is not, that is more communicative than reflexive. I think where we struggle as theatre makers is that I've had conversations with people, for example, actors and other theatre makers who have said that they would really struggle to work in this environment online, dealing with multiple inputs, trying to maintain a thread of thought and perform, and they just want their audience nice and quiet and sitting there watching them. But that's not how it works online. So there's this clash. So we have this clash, this competition between the immediacy of the delivery of the story and the presentation, that big reflexive presentation. It's also the changer in that because of this communicative style of technology, I have to talk direct address to you. I can't talk to someone with this fourth wall. Remember we talked about the fourth wall a few weeks ago. The fourth wall is all up and I talk to someone and I alienate you and I forget that you're there and I don't include you, then that's actually a failure of this performance. That represents a failure of this performance because this medium demands the communication. That's probably the biggest thing to come out of this. So just to recap, in the last few weeks we've talked about how theatre is a structure, a social act made up of structures, roles, responsibility and performances that different people make, both as actors and audience members. That it is because it is a social act, it is a deeply reflexive kind of environment. There was a guy called Batkin who tried to understand that sort of hierarchy of that hierarchy of order of narrative that goes from author's voice to performer. Now he dealt with it through literature mainly and reading. When it came to performance, his theory he struggled with his own theory because there is that order, it just degenerates into a carnival where everyone's talking and everyone's interacting and the act the social act itself is the thing, not the experience of the art or the writing. So he'd struggle to understand that. He called it carnival. Carnival kind of works in this sense too, because it is a lot of people talking, a lot of people jumping on, talking back. It's interactive. It's kind of a mess. It is the act itself of being engaged, not the act of contemplating the engagement. Yes. Yes. So then this guy Nash came along with his media theory, which kind of helps us to understand that gap that Batkin had, because he understands media in terms of this content, code and communication. And that's what we've been talking about in terms of the Batkin hierarchy. There is code. Code determines how information is processed, how it's delivered, how it's received. In the software, in the coding, in the data sharing and all of that, that's all coded stuff. Code doesn't make content. People make content using the code. But that content is nothing without communication as a metric to measure its success. And that's where we are at. What we have to get our heads around. If we're going to work online and not just use online and social media as a broadcast mechanism for what we already do, we're not going to use it as a marketing tool for what we're going to do. We're going to use it as an engaged, politically active and charged form of new entertainment in the new millennia. We have to get our heads around the idea of that shift. Yeah. I'm excited by this stuff because I'm finally able to unravel this knot of thinking in my head. Look, half an hour stream, we worked through a bit of stuff, someone jumped on, they jumped off again. I'm not getting much communication, obviously, but that's okay. This is an example, this is an absolute example of that chaotic carnival-esque type thing. I'm using code, I'm making contact, but I'm not having communication. So 1 out of the 3, if there's 1 out of the 3 that aren't working, and that breaks down, doesn't it? Because if you have one of those 3, if you have like an app and everyone's talking about the app, but the code of the app doesn't work and you can't make content, then no one's talking about it, or they're talking about communicating about it, or they're not using it to communicate. Yeah, I'm going to go back and watch this again because this is really cool. Look, that's probably about all I'm going to do today because it's New Year. Well, it's not New Year's Day. It's Friday the 3rd of January. Happy New Year. I'm going to go have a coffee. I'm going to have a decompress of this sort of stuff, and I reckon I might come back and do a bit of writing later. And thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Michael Allen, an theatre-making anthropologist doing a PhD in developing a new genre of performing theatre online in a social media environment. Pretty exciting stuff. Got a lot of things planned for the year. Creative projects, research projects, still got a thesis to write, still developing this. And one of the things I'm going to start doing as part of that thesis is some broadcasting. Yeah, hey, you can watch anything online. You may as well watch someone write a thesis. If you've ever wanted to know how fascinatingly boring that can be as an observer, then join me on my Twitch channel, which is Twitch MAP_T4D. That's map Twitch MAP T4D. Let me get it up for you. I'll show you. Twitch. Like I say, my computers are slow. Welcome to Australia's internet. Australia's internet in the middle summer and bushfire season, where the services only last so long. Mind you, they're often not much better when we don't have heat waves and hot summers. Wow, that's a loop. Anyway, can you see that? It's looping back. That's my Twitch channel, MAP_T4D. I'm going to jump off, grab myself a coffee, and I'm going to come back and jump on Twitch. I'm going to close down YouTube, so if you're watching me on there, hey. And then I'm going to come back and do some writing and try and get some of these ideas down because they're really good. Fuck off. Alright, there we go. See you later. Love you long time.